Hey guys, Chris from Average Skate Reviews here, and I'm back. It's been a minute, it's been over a year since I posted a video, but I'm back. Now that I've got the Insta360 X5 camera, I'm going to be able to post a lot more videos. There's a couple of other boards that I've got in the pipe works, but of course I wanted to start with my all-time favorite brand of boards, and that's Evolve. I like them because they're predictable, they're reliable, and I know what I'm getting with their boards, but more importantly, they offer support in the country that I live in, which is pretty much one of the primary reasons, aside from the way that their boards look and ride, that I really like this brand. Now what we have over here is their new release, which is the Fusion board. Now if you remember the GTR series of boards, the original GTR, which was a very special board for me because not only was it a board that aesthetically I really fell in love with the way that the board looked, it was the fact that it was the board I learned to properly ride an electric skateboard on. What I mean by that is previously to that I was riding booster boards, which, you know, they were great at the time, but when you look at the price, you look at what you got for it, it was madness. I don't even know why I got 2 or 3 of those boards, but I digress. The GTR series of boards taught me what it was to slide, what it was to carve. All of these terms at the time of riding these boards were completely new to me. I jumped on an electric skateboard that had street wheels and I would ride in basically a straight line, dead straight, standing upright. I didn't really understand what it meant to carve a board, to make it go sideways, to slide it to 180. All of that came after finding the Evolve series of boards. Now, one thing I really loved about the GTR was the fact that I felt that it was where a skateboard was fused with electronic components to make it an electric longboard, but still felt like a longboard. Now that is exactly what we have here. It's where the mix of the electronics that are strapped to the board are working in unison with the deck that this board has, which is probably the best looking deck I've ever seen on a skateboard, but we'll come to that when we look at the design. Now, what we've got over here with their Fusion series of boards is a board that kind of encompasses everything that was great about the GTR, but without any of the compromise. Main one for me was going to be motor overheating. I'm not even going to pretend that that wasn't a thing. That was a big deal. Next to that was going to be the range and the top speed. What we've got on this board is not something that goes insanely fast, and I kind of understand why Evolve don't create a board that does 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, because number one, that's flat out insane, and I know there are boards that do that, and there are boards that do that I've had a go of, but it's not something that I'd want to ride on the daily, because I've come off plenty of times, and going any faster than the Evolve series of boards goes is unnecessary when you weigh it up against the risk of what could happen if something goes wrong. And trust me guys, I've seen and I've experienced multiple things going wrong at high-end speeds, and I don't really want to experience that anymore. What you have over here is something that is not slow by any means. It's fast enough for an electric longboard, but most importantly, it's how it feels. Now that kind of leads really nicely onto the feel of the board, because I think that's one of the things that is missed. A lot of the times with some of the skateboards that are being released now is they border on electric vehicles and not skateboards. This is a wooden deck that looks insane. It looks like, almost reminds me of like a mahogany dining table. Sounds like a bit of a weird comparison, but I mean in how rich and how expensive the deck looks. It just looks like something you want to put on your wall rather than something that you want to stick on the street and ride. The trucks with the kind of gold color that they have on them look absolutely insane, and then the tan wheels, the whole board is tied together so well, and the design is definitely a 10/10 from my perspective. Now when we look at how it rides, what I was talking about how some boards are bordering on electric vehicles is they have electronics, batteries, motors strapped to them, but this still feels like a longboard. It doesn't feel like it's being overpowered by the electronics that are attached to it. It's working in unison with the deck. A lot of the boards, even some of the ones that Evolve has, like the Diablo series, especially the Diablo Bamboo, it's very heavy in comparison to something like this, and you do notice it when you ride the Hadian or the Diablo and then jump straight onto a GTR series board, or in this case the Fusion. It's so much more compact in terms of its design, but most importantly, it's how it handles when you're turning, when you're sliding, when you're carving. Because of how the electronics have been selected and attached to this board, a battery that's not too overwhelming, it moves like a skateboard, and you really feel it when you're carving or zipping in and out of corners, avoiding traffic, dropping down off of curbs, turning aggressively, carving like a crackhead, as I always like to say. This particular board really does still feel like a skateboard, whereas some of the other boards are incredibly heavy, and you start to notice that when you're trying to be agile with the board. In other words, this is an incredibly agile, lightweight board. It almost feels like you could kickflip it if you really wanted to. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you could do that. I'm sure someone out there probably could, but what I mean is that the balance between the electronics, the deck, the build, the way that it's been laid out, it really does feel like one of the boards that kind of kickstarted the popularity of electric skateboards, especially the brand Evolve with the GTR, but it's kind of been upgraded and brought into 2025. The interesting thing with this board and the way it fits in with Evolve's other lineups, which if you're very fortunate enough to have tried, or in my case, one of the few that actually has the entire lineup, it is interesting because each board does definitely have a place. Now, technically, my go-to board at the minute, I'm not gonna lie, is the Renegade, but I was riding the Diablo Bamboo, which is probably my second favorite board that Evolve makes, to kind of get back used to riding double kingpin trucks, because the Renegade board is a completely different setup, which, you know, if you want to see a video explaining all of Evolve's boards in my perspective, in my terms, let me know. I'll be happy to make that happen. If you guys want to see that, comment down below. But this board fits in a very particular place, because the Diablo series with the Renegade, the Carbon and the Bamboo are big high-powered boards with a greater top speed than this particular board and a higher range. But what you get with this is that sort of board that you can use to rip around a city. You can get up to good speed. I'm getting 26, 27 miles an hour. Advertised speed on this board is 26, so I can't complain there. Evolve have always been very accurate with the speeds that you get. I'm getting 27 at max with the 66 tooth gears on the 7-inch wheels, all-terrain wheels, of course. No problem hitting 27 miles an hour, which for me is enough on a board with a deck of this length and sort of width. It's perfect in my opinion. Now, the way that this board fits in, the Diablo series of boards are much bigger. Not saying you can't pick up a Diablo board and go up a flight of stairs, but it is considerably heavy than what you get with this Fusion board. This is the sort of board that I'm probably going to ride more than the others because of its profile. It's easy to carry around. It's very lightweight to pick up with one hand and run up a flight of stairs. If you're kind of out for the day, doing a bit of shopping, walking through shopping centers, this is the sort of board that's not going to be too cumbersome to carry with you. Whereas the other ones, more power, more range, bigger battery, bigger deck, wider deck, all of that signifies that the board is going to be a little bit more cumbersome to carry around. And that's one of the advantages of this particular board. You're getting the speed, you're getting a good amount of range. Advertised range is 25 miles. I'm sat between 24 and 23 miles based on the way that I ride, which is fairly aggressively. That is a perfect setup for an enjoyable day of riding a board. Now, charge time around 4 hours, which for me is kind of like the biggest deal breaker with Evolve boards. I think that a fast charger at this point is something Evolve need to offer. I know that there are things that go wrong with fast chargers. They destroy your battery life a lot quicker. I feel like if you sell a fast charger, you could add a warning saying that this will destroy the battery's performance over time with repeated use, but I think it should be offered as an option. Let me know if you guys back that up. Evolve, if you're watching, come on, fast charger, please make it an option. I don't care if it smokes my battery. I don't want to use it all the time, but if I'm going to London and I want to ride around all day, I don't want to have to wait 4 hours for my board to charge. But if you do want me to make a video where I kind of highlight who I think all of the different Evolve boards are for, definitely comment down below because it's a video I'd like to make. And also if you'd like to see me compare this board to the Diablo Bamboo, which is the closest sort of relation that Evolve make in terms of the closest comparison to this particular board. Both wooden decks, which one should you go for if you're trying to figure that out? Let me know. So overall, guys, there isn't much that I can really complain about this board. I'm really pleased with the way that it looks. That's probably the biggest thing about it. And more importantly, I'm really stoked with the way that it rides. The GTR, like I said, was a really special board because it kind of taught me how to really ride electric skateboards. And I had a GTR. Something happened to it. I wasn't able to get the board back. It wasn't taken or anything like that. It was a shipping issue that ended up meaning that board was just poof, gone. I was really gutted about that because that was a board I intended to keep forever. So having a board like this definitely subsedes something like the Series 2 GTR because it's a lot more grunt, a lot more power, and I feel like they've done a lot with the way that it looks. It still kind of feels very Evolve, but definitely looks like something that I want to put on my mantelpiece rather than rip around with. Now, would I like a longer deck? Of course, a longer deck means wider foot stance, more control, lower center of gravity, all of that stuff. But you can obviously adjust the trucks and move them a little bit more forward, which is something I'm definitely going to be doing after this video. The deck length on this is 95.5 centimeters. The usable deck length is 66.5 centimeters, and the width is 23.5 centimeters. That's with my measuring, so hopefully that's accurate. But of course, reference the Evolve website if you want to see bang on what they're saying. But that's my quick measurements with a tape measure. Now, of course, a slightly wider deck, a slightly longer deck would be great, but that's what the Diablo series of boards is for. This definitely fits into a unique pocket where you're getting as much power, speed, grunt, acceleration as you would expect in a modern board, but with a much more practical size, practical weight, and also a more longboard-esque feel while you're riding. I think that's where this is separate from the other boards that Evolve offers, of course, except the Stoke. This really does feel like an electric longboard, where the electric element of it is working in unison with the skateboard element of this board, and it results in having something that is incredibly agile, incredibly fun to ride, but most importantly takes you back to kind of like what the original Evolve boards were like in terms of that absolute shredding, absolute carving machine. If any of you guys have surfed or done wakeboarding, that's what this board feels like. It's the closest that you can get. The other boards that Evolve has are great. The Stoke in particular is one that kind of gives you that surfer feel, but in terms of the actual sort of being on water or carving or snowboarding feeling that you get from a skateboard, in terms of what's available from Evolve right now, I think this is the best option. Now, the other series of boards are something else, and I feel like I really need a separate video to touch on that. So if you want to see that, please comment down below and let me know. Now, in terms of the more generic stuff you might want to know about the skateboard, it's using Evolve's trigger style remote, the phase remote, that you can adjust a bunch of settings on the board, not only in terms of its performance, limitations with top speeds, changing the lights that it has on the board. I've always liked these triggers. It's my preference for a style of remote that you get. There's not really much that I would say I'd like to change on this. Maybe a slightly brighter display would be great. When it's really bright outside, it can be a little bit hard to see the display, but there's not really much I can say about moaning about these things. They're very durable, very reliable. In terms of the braking on the board, it's as you would expect from an Evolve board. The braking is not too sharp, but it definitely feels like if you need to stop, you can stop. Acceleration, this has Corsa mode, which is the mode above Sport. So off the line, the acceleration is pretty good. I can't really fault it. Of course, it's not a four-wheel drive board, but as it goes for this particular style of skateboard, I really can't fault the acceleration. It's more than enough to get off the line and get ahead of anything in traffic that you might be trying to avoid. Now, when we look at the build and the design of this board, that's definitely something that I really can't fault. It's not an overly complicated design. It's not an integrated carbon chassis with the battery built into the housing. It's a wooden board, but the wood, the quality of wood that they've used. The interesting thing about these boards is that no two trees are going to be identical. So depending on when you buy your board and what batch of parts that board has been constructed from, the deck might be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more stiff, or slightly darker or slightly lighter than some of the other boards that are out there, which I always find really interesting. These boards, I can't fault the way they look. I think they look incredible, and the way that they've married up that wooden deck with these kind of like goldish mustard colored trucks, I think looks absolutely sick. And it's all tied together by those tanned wheels, which I actually took off this board and put on my Diablo because of how much I love them. I've ended up buying another set of wheels. I think I'm gonna go for the white ones over the tanned ones for my Diablo, but this particular board definitely needs to sit with the tan wheels because it matches the deck and the trucks so well. Build quality is as you would expect from Evolve. Everything looks like it's been constructed incredibly well. Evolve are known for making pretty boards, and this is definitely no exception. So in terms of the build and the design, it's a 10/10. Even the way that the Fusion and also Evolve logo on the top of the deck are actually engraved into the wood, it just feels expensive, and it's nice when you get a board that costs what this costs, but it feels like you've not been kind of like shortchanged on what you've paid. I really, really like the way this board comes together, and I'm really, really excited to ride the crap out of it and give you some more feedback a few months down the line. Overall, I'm really pleased with this board, and the fact that it's Evolve and they have a base in the UK means I can get the board serviced if I ever need to. So far, the performance has been something that I can't really fault, but the most important thing for me has been the enjoyment of riding the skateboard. It feels good to ride a board that's powerful, more than enough top speed, a good amount of range, unfortunate charge time, but it's the feel of riding this board that is really difficult to put into words. Out of all of the boards that I've ridden that start to feel more like electric vehicles, this feels like a longboard. This feels like I'm almost surfing on the sidewalk, which is one of the biggest advantages that this particular style of board has. It's not a massive battery, it's not super massive powerful motors, but it's enough, and the feeling that it gives you is what makes this board so worthwhile having. So overall, guys, A big thumbs up for me with this board. Series 2 was a great skateboard, but I didn't feel like it was a board for me, and I said that in the review. However, this Fusion board is definitely something that feels like it's for me, and is definitely a board that I'm going to be holding on to add to the collection that we have currently. So if you want to see a comparison between this and the Diablo Carbon, or rather the Diablo Bamboo probably makes the most sense, comment down below and let me know. And if you want to see a full video on Evolve's lineup, comment down below and let me know. But big thank you for watching, guys. Thumbs up, subscribe, and take care till the next video. I'm curious to know how many of you noticed this on the riding footage and the photos, and how many of you were triggered by it. Yes, it was intentional. No, the motors didn't get hot.